This morning we are going to look at the blood system vocabulary, and I have taken our list of 42 words and cut it down significantly. Okay, there's a lot of parts of this chapter that we've cut out just because um, with only doing 3 days a week and doing it distant, um, it's just going to be too hard to get through everything. So I've cut it down quite a bit. So I'm going to go through the vocab words of the things that we actually talked about in the chapter. The first one being antibody. Antibody is not a new term for us. We talked about antibodies and antigens quite a while ago. And so we're just going to review that. An antibody is a protein that is produced by lymphocytes. And remember, lymphocytes are those fighter cells, our white blood cells that fight off infection. So it's produced by those in response to a bacteria, a virus, or an antigen. Um, a certain An antibody is specific to an antigen, okay? And then it shuts that antigen off. So I used the picture of this COVID-19 antibody test tube because that's something that is actually being worked on right now. They're working on developing tests to to be able to test your blood and see if there's antibodies built up in your blood um, for the COVID. And so, what does that mean? It means that at some point you have either been exposed enough that your body has built antibodies in response to it, or that you've had it already, which personally I think is probably the case. I think that some people had it earlier and we didn't really realize that's what it was. There's a lot of really smart people arguing with me about that, but that's my personal opinion. The next one is antigen, and it's kind of hard to um, like antibody. The definition of antibody had antigen in it. So hopefully you remembered antigen a little bit when we were going through there, because otherwise it's hard to define a word using a word that you don't know. So if you remember, antigen is a substance that stimulates production of an antibody. So um, virus, bacteria, um, anything like that that's foreign, something that's foreign that stimulates that antibody um, to be produced. Bilirubin. Bilirubin is the orange yellow pigment in bile. Okay, it's formed when hemoglobin is broken down. Okay, um, hemoglobin gets broken down when red blood cells are being destroyed. Um, the time we hear about bilirubin the most is in infants when they have jaundice, or adults can have jaundice as well. But we hear about it most often with babies. So their red blood cells are being destroyed, hemoglobin's being broken down, and that yellow pigment, that yellow bile, just kind of builds up. And that's what produces that kind of yellowish tint in our eyes, our skin, when we are jaundiced. Coagulation is blood clotting. We're not going to get into all of the steps of coagulation. We're just going to know that coagulation is blood clotting. There's a couple of vocab words that we took out, fibrin and fibrin is that green stringy, kind of greenish colored stringy stuff there with the red blood cells. But basically, it's protein strands that kind of gunk up the red blood cells to form a clot. That's what's demonstrated in this picture. The next one is differentiation. It is the when cells change as they mature. So an example of differentiation would be um, like the erythroblasts maturing into erythrocytes. Okay. Um, and we also call it specialization. Erythroblast. Remember, erythro means red, blast means immature cell. So we have an immature red blood cell. My dog is going crazy doing his morning shake and stretch. So if you heard that, that's what that was. Erythrocyte is simply a red blood cell. This picture shows the concaveness on one side of the erythrocyte. If we could lift that up, if it was 3D and we could pick it up, you'd see that the bottom is exactly the same. You flipped it over top to bottom, then the cell would look the same. It's kind of um, almost like a donut or a ring, um, but you could see that concave on both sides. The next one is hemoglobin. Hemoglobin is a word we hear a lot, I think, but I don't know that we necessarily know exactly what it means. But it's a blood protein containing iron, and it carries oxygen in red blood cells. So if we had a test tube of blood, sometimes when you get your blood drawn, it's red, but it's not a really bright red. And other times it's really, really bright red. If it's really, really bright red, it means the hemoglobin is up in it. There's a lot of oxygen in it. It's very oxygenated blood. Versus if it's a little bit more dull. Hemolysis. If we take the word hemolysis and we break it down into hemo and lysis. Hemo means blood, lysis means breakdown or destruction. So if we put it together, we have the destruction or breakdown of blood. Heparin. Heparin is an anticoagulant found in blood tissues. It can also be um, taken if you're low. Immune reaction. It's the response of the immune system to a foreign invasion, whether that is a virus, a bacteria, okay, any response by the immune system to fight off that foreign um, invasion is an immune response. I think about hopefully all of our bodies are, if we are in contact. I know I have been in contact with some COVID patients through my work at the hospital and probably some in the community too. You never know. But I think about, my immune system going to work, going to fight off the COVID germs so that I don't get sick. I thought this was kind of a funny graphic because we don't necessarily think of our immune system in that way, but it's true. Um, Another way we can have an immune reaction is um, it's getting nice out. The pollen and allergen is getting really high. And so if we're working in the yard all day and we get some of that dust and those particles in our body, and our immune system goes to work and fights that off, we get a runny nose, we get a little cough, we get a little tickle in our throat, maybe itchy, watery eyes. All those things are an immune reaction. They're fighting off whatever that foreign substance is in the body. Leukocyte's an easy one, because by now you guys are very well versed in knowing that leuko means white and cyte means cell. So it's just simply a white blood cell. Plasma. Remember, plasma is that liquid portion of the blood made up of water, proteins, salts, nutrients, lipids, hormones, and vitamins. So I like this picture because it kind of shows before and after the centrifuge. So if we were to take a vial of blood, and it would look like the picture on the left, right? As soon as it's drawn out of our arm, looks like the picture on the left. Then they put it into the centrifuge, which remember is that machine that spins it around so that it separates. And we get the test tube on the right. The erythrocytes, the formed cells, have settled to the bottom, and the plasma rises to the top. That 55% of the blood being the plasma, and that just rises up to the top. We also have kind of a middle layer that we haven't talked about yet, which is our buffy coat. And that's where the leukocytes and the platelets um, collect. Plasmapheresis. If we take the word plasmapheresis, we break it into plasma, which means plasma, pheresis, which means removal. And so it's the removal of plasma from blood that's been removed from our body and put into a centrifuge. Those collected cells are then retransferred back into the donor. So if we're going to donate plasma, which I think I talked about at one point, you can make a little bit of money by donating plasma. Um, my husband has more experience with it than I do. He donated plasma for a while in college. Um, but they draw your blood, they put it into the centrifuge, they separate the plasma up, they remove the plasma out. That's the donation you give, and then they give you your cells back. Platelet. Platelet is a small portion of blood that collects at sites when there's an injury to start the clotting process. So it kind of collects and gums up. We've all seen probably little blood clots. Maybe we broke our nose and you can see it kind of like clumped up um, when an injury occurs. Okay. Otherwise, we would continue and continue and continue to bleed forever. So those little fragments just kind of gum up, kind of get sticky together and stop that bleeding process. If you have had a bloody nose and tried to get back to participation of sport, I think about our wrestlers all the time with this because we will shove a nose plug up their nose and then sometimes they'll come back off the mat a couple of times or whatever. And sometimes they'll want to pull that blood or that um, nose plug out. And I'll say, no, 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 don't pull it out. Don't pull it out. You'll break up the clot. And when they do, they separate that clot. And so then it's no longer a sticky clump, and then they'll start bleeding again. So I don't want them to keep the nose plug in forever, but at least until that match is over, I want them to keep that clot maintained. Same thing. A lot of times in old days, you would hear, or um, old wives' tales, you'd hear people say to blow your nose. Well, you don't want to clear that clot out, blow that clot out of your nose, or the bleeding's going to start up again. Rh factor. Rh factor is an antigen um, on red blood cells in Rh positive individuals. Only becomes a problem, like we talked about, when the mother is negative and the baby is positive. So that's kind of demonstrated by this picture here. Serum is plasma minus the clotting proteins in cells. So basically, if you think about it as the liquid portion of blood, you're pretty much on the right track. Okay. But it's clear yellowish fluid that separates from the blood when it's allowed to clot. So um, put it in the centrifuge, it separates out, and then you they wait to see how much it or how long it takes to clot. That's a test that they do. And then you can pull that serum out, that part away from the blood or from the clot. Um, it is formed from plasma, but does not contain protein coagulation factors. And the last vocab is thrombocyte, which simply is a platelet. We're going to stop there for today. We're going to do a couple practice activities with vocab over tomorrow to look at those again. And then I hope that you all have a great day, and we'll see you tomorrow.